Hey, David Rafhoff here with another React video. Hope you're doing well. I've kind of been on a theme recently of like refactoring and cleaning up code. This is just like something I spent a ton of time doing in my career and like learning about and just excited about. And it's always fun. Like there's always something to learn. There's always a challenge. It's always takes some communication to talk through. Um, I've worked in different languages and frameworks and have recently been pretty much doing React work pretty much full time in a mix of JavaScript and TypeScript. Moving more, always trying to do more TypeScript just because it gives you a lot more safety. But anyway, I wanted to touch on some the patterns that I think are kind of common. I know some of these are kind of well known in the React community, but I think there's like analogs of them that get lost too. So anyway, I thought I would start with talking about the theme a little bit, and then like maybe an example that most people are pretty aware of, and then just kind of like variations of that. So um, typically in React, you want to the simpler you can keep the components, the easier it is to work with them and change them and test them. The less that's going on in them, like the easier it is to just test them. And like one area where this gets kind of difficult is when you're dealing with state changes. So, a thing that a pattern that's I think pretty well understood in the React community is just dealing with things like data containers. So, just in case you're not familiar with it, like one of the things that you'll frequently have to do is when you enter a new route or a new major section of your application or just something that's in charge of say your application is dealing with like books or doesn't matter, yeah, just say books. Like initially when you load your application for a user, you may have to go request like a whole bunch of books and then figure out how to display those and all the details of the individual books, and maybe there's like other stuff that goes with it, like your favorite books or whatever. Doesn't really matter. But at some point, there's something that's got to reach out in your application and like get the list of books. It's got to know some things. It's got to know how to connect to like it's got to know how to make API calls or how to connect to your store or whatever it is. Like somehow it's got a fair amount of responsibility with knowing how to go out into the world in your application and like get the data that you need. So yeah, there's just a pattern. I'm pretty sure it's referred to as data containers, where you'll build something that isolates all of that information about going out and retrieving information and dealing with the problems that can come up, like maybe the request time's out, maybe you don't get any data back. Maybe you basically get like an empty list of books or something, or maybe there's like real errors, like you just can't connect, somebody's not authorized, whatever. There's like a whole list of things to deal with. So yeah, like a pattern you can follow is this thing called the data container, where it's really just responsible for dealing with all that stuff, and you can it's generally like a lot of wiring between different things in there, and we're just walking through a number of cases like errors and success cases and all that stuff. Empty data, like no data, an empty set of data, having data. So anyway, if you can like isolate all that stuff into one place, it's really nice, because from that point on, all of your components, all you have to do is like give them the readily available data you have, and just like let them render like however they would render normally. So with that pattern, you're isolating like all this stuff that's like asynchronous or kind of in some ways like out of your hands in an area. And that's really cool, because you can do like a whole bunch of testing on that and make sure that that's all set up really well. But then from that point on, you can just assume that you've got everything you need, right? So like one place where that could be useful is handling all those different cases. Like maybe you start your application with an initial state where you don't have any data, and you want to show like a good empty state placeholder where you say like, hey, we know this is your first time using the application, so you don't have any books at the moment, but as you purchase books, this is where they will appear. And by the way, have you seen these these great bestsellers or whatever, New York Times bestsellers? So really high up in your application, you can basically push all this stuff for like dealing with the world in your database or your APIs or whatever, like all the way out to the like top of the tree. If you think of your components as like a tree of components where you have more and more of them, the deeper you get into the views that you're rendering, you can kind of isolate all that stuff at the top of the tree. And so then what that allows you to do is, you can have that empty state component, which I talked about. You could have a state for like when a designated component for when you have like one book or something, which may be very different from if you have like 100, right? Like maybe you just go ahead and show all the details for the only book that you've purchased instead of requiring you to like click into it. And then you could have your component for your list of books or whatever. But you can handle all that stuff at a very high level, and all of those things are kind of siblings, and you can assume that they all have all the data they need to do whatever it is that they need to do, right? And that just kind of like percolates all the way down. So within each of those things, like if you're dealing with if you get back a list of books that somebody's ordered within that component, you could just render, for every book that they have, you can render a book, and then the book can, as part of its props or inputs or whatever, you can give it the book's information, and maybe there's other stuff like things you've favorited or whatever, who knows. But the point is like you shrink the number of inputs or things that each component has to care about, and it makes it far easier to test. So if you do that, then all you have to do is test the component, assuming that the inputs are good, valid inputs, and maybe even add tests for when you don't get any data or whatever, like the props aren't there or something. But you're not testing when you're rendering a book. You're not testing to make sure that the API calls were good, or you're not testing to make sure that the case for not having any books is handled, or the case for getting an error from the API call is handled. Like things start to get much more granular and more isolated, and it's easier to test them independently. And then there's a lot of different dimensions on that, but that's kind of the main idea at the component level. I would say also too, if you find that you have a lot of like what I would call like business logic in your components, like if you're doing a lot of computation that's specific to your business, just a really simple example is like date formats. You take like a timestamp and convert that to like a human readable date, for example, and you want to do that consistently. Like you could test that in every single component that lists a date, or you could take everything that you all of your date handling logic, and you could move that into like its own module or something that just handles formatting that date. And what that would buy you is, instead of testing 25 different components that list dates and making sure that they're in the right format, you could just test that one place that formats dates and make sure it gives you the right format, and then just assume anywhere that is using it is going to give you a date in the right format. So anyway, just have been thinking more about in large React applications where the opportunities are to kind of make things easier on yourself, both in terms of maintaining code, but also in terms of like doing testing and making sure you're able to with your testing cover all the different variations that are important to cover, and not avoid them because you're writing tests that are very big and slow to run and maybe brittle, if they're dealing with like kind of too much of the stack or overall process in your application. So would love to hear if what your thoughts are on that, what you've tried, if you've tried any of these techniques, if they've worked for you. Also, if you have any resources that you would recommend to me or to anybody else who's listening to go out and check to read up about this, that would be great. From what I can tell, it seems like there's more awareness of this kind of need to break problems down. I would say in the TypeScript community, there just seems to be a little more focus on this. I haven't seen as much in the JavaScript community, the JavaScript React community. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right places. So yeah, if you've got any like books or articles or authors or people talks or whatever that you think are relevant, feel free to like throw those in the comments below. Definitely be interested in seeing who's out there experimenting with this kind of stuff and sharing info on it. So yeah, I'll probably be doing some more videos where I'm going through actual code at some point in the future. But I just thought I'd get this one out here real quick. And so yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.